Hello, Assalamu alaikum. First of all, Omar, can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
All right, thank you. Well, first of all, it was so nice to see the Professor Farouk Afzal after a long time, and seeing that how he's doing good. And so my presentation, Dr. Farouk Afzal set a very nice stage for me, to be honest. I was not expecting him to give examples, but that's exactly what I'm going to do as well. So let me begin by saying that as Dr. Farouk Afzal mentioned, quite a bit of examples of leadership. And my task in next 20, 30 minutes is to differentiate the difference between leadership and power. And this can be tricky because it's not always clear who is the leader and who is the person who has power. So as Farouk Afzal Saab mentioned about the definition of a leader, I am not sure how to define a leader. There are many examples of how we define leaders. The way I look at leadership is exactly what happens to myself when I go to a shopping mall or to a big place. Why? Because I get lost quite often and I find myself looking for a sign like this. Now, why is this important? Because whenever you're lost in life, you need somebody who can tell you, where are you? Number one. Number two, where do you want to go? And number three, exactly how you get there. So these three important things in life are so crucial for any of us to get where we want. Now, I would encourage you, as Dr. Farouk Afzal Saab mentioned, all of you to look back in your lives and look back at those mentors or those teachers or anybody for that matter who has created that role for you. Now, how do you know who these people are? Well, first of all, as I mentioned that I get lost in malls all the times, but I also know there are some people who never need these maps. And I feel like these people are born with something like an internal built-in GPS. These people know who they are, know where they are, and they know where they're going. These people also understand what the future may look like and how exactly to get there. If all of us look back at our lives, I am sure we can find more than one people like this who just knew where they were and what they were doing. We have seen all these people, I would vouch to say, in high school, college, medical school, training, in our life, in our friends, seniors, juniors, our spouses, our friends, they're all around us. And all we have to do is to pay a little attention next time when we talk to these people, to identify, to pay a conscious effort to knowing who these people are. An important thing, these could be our juniors as well. These are the people who are younger than us sometimes that we can learn quite a big deal. And now, if you ask ourselves, what do we call these people? I feel like I call, many of these people as, somebody so-and-so is level-headed, so-and-so is grounded, that person is solid, or is a great coworker, or is well-balanced. These are the things, these are terms we use to describe such people. And these people in our lives also make us feel secure, comfortable, and we trust them. And somehow we know that these people will never let us down. Interestingly enough, none of these people in my life, at least, are calling themselves, standing up and asking that, they're leaders, or they're asking for authority, or frankly, asking anybody to like them. They're just confident and they're just trustworthy. And I would vouch to say that these are the people who are true leaders in our lives. They are all around us. And as successful human beings, I think what we need to do is to get good habits from each of these individuals, no matter if they're senior to us, they're junior to us, they're younger than us. You know what? We may not know them, but I feel that this is the name of life, to keep collecting these pearls of wisdom for all different people, to make sure that we become good human beings. As you know, Peter Drucker is one of the famous strategists from last century, and as he said here, that if you look at lifetime of any leader, nobody is set out to be a leader. What happens in a lifetime is some people just express themselves so well, and they're so kind-hearted and mean so well that people get attracted towards them and people just follow them, and that's how they become leaders. And I'm going to give you a few examples, but in all essence, the difference between leadership and power is that leaders have influence. Anybody in any walk of life who has influence on other human beings is a leader in some shape or form. So in essence, leadership is the act of leading a group of people, and power is the ability to do something or act in a particular way to enforce things. So interesting thing is that there are similarity and differences in leaders and powers. Sometimes we see that leaders are exerting their influence by having some inherent power. We can also see that some very powerful people are able to lead because of their position. So there's not mutually exclusive. Leaders can be powerful, and powerful people can also be leaders. But I also believe that every person in any of these positions does have to have a moral compass, which determines is he or she a better leader, or is he or she a better power enforcer. Leadership, is, some people would say that leadership is title, or somebody has many titles or positions or has power. I would like to say this is not what leadership is. Getting titles, as the Professor Faisal Aziz just mentioned, getting titles or getting positions, becoming chairman or becoming, big things, presidents and vice presidents, actually does not mean that anybody is a leader. It will, it doesn't mean that people will listen to us. People may, follow us because they have to get a salary. So they may listen to us, but people are not going to follow us if we're not influencing them with heart. And the other one of my favorite quotes is that, John Maxwell is a famous, person who's written many things about leadership, that position does not make a leader. It's a leader who makes the position. So I'll go in a few seconds. Is that my goal today is to give you a few examples, very personal examples from my lifetime, to talk about, a few people whom I still look back in my life. And, there are hundreds and hundreds of people who we look back and learn from things. But a few people I believe that left an everlasting impression on me, apart from my parents and family. So first one, I still remember I was in fourth grade. I was born and raised in Adak, a very small town in northern Punjab. So I was in FG Public High School, Adak, and I was in fourth grade. And I still remember Sir Tariq used to be one of our teachers. And something happened which I felt very uncomfortable in sharing all my life, but I can share at this point in life that, myself and a few other kids were making fun of somebody who did not bring lunch at the lunch break. So we're making fun of him, and frankly, we were very brutal. When Sir Tariq, he pulled me aside and he said, you never know, what are the reasons this person did not bring his lunch? It is possible maybe this kid could not afford lunch. Maybe he knew something about something very, very profound about that other individual. So as a children, we did not have the right to make fun of him. And I learned a very valuable lesson from him at that time, that whenever God gives us something, whenever we possess something and somebody else does not have that, it's not that the other person does not want or need that thing. Maybe just God decided never to give that person that thing. So as whenever we go in any walk of life, I can tell you, you are all, mashallah, very well-educated people. When you walk outside this hall, you'll find many people who cannot afford lunch, who cannot afford water to drink. So always be kind to any individual who has less than you in life, because that's what makes us good human beings. Moving forward, I did my from 8th to 10th grade. I went 8th to 12th grade. I went to Cadet College Hasnabdal, one of the very good institutions in our country. And I still remember I was in 10th grade, and we all are competitive people, and I was very competitive as well, super competitive. And there was something in our class, and I was in fierce competition with somebody else, and I was about to hurt somebody very seriously. When one of my teachers, Sir Salimi, pulled me aside, and he gave me one of the very valuable lessons of my life. And he said कि बेटा जो जिंदगी होती है उसमें Allah gives you some things and there's some things which Allah doesn't give you. But always believe in destiny. We all should work hard for whatever desires and dreams we have. At the same time, we should never try to take anything away from anybody. And this is something which I never understood at that time. But it took me years and years to understand the wisdom behind this, that the way this world works is that, Allah gives us things and then Allah gives other things to other people as well. However, if any point in life, if we think we can steal things from others or we can hurt others by getting, things from others, Allah rewards other person in many, many more ways. And Allah sometimes punishes you by giving things away from you. And I'm a living prime example of that. If many people have in my life have taken many things away from me. And I felt like whenever somebody took actively anything away from me, I felt like Allah rewarded me in many different ways. So I do believe that believing in destiny is just so important for all of you there. If you want to become a leader in your life, always remember, never take anything away from anybody, because it makes us bad human beings. Moving on, Dr. Hassan Khan, one of our seniors in Mayo Hospital at that time, when I was a fourth year and fifth year student. And he's one of those people who left a very lasting impression on me, because he was a registrar in Arch Surgical Ward in late 90s, and he was a very kind individual. He was very kind to medical students, and I still remember that in this brutal world, which I'm sure many of you medical students still remember, how it can be sometimes very harsh in medical school, how people treat us. But he was one of those people who was always very kind to us as students. And frankly, he had no reason to be nice to us. He was just a kind individual. And I still remember pursuing surgical route. I always remembered his example that if and when I become a surgeon, no matter how big or how small of a surgeon we become, we should always have some kindness in our hearts. And then I think I'll give you a few examples of same scenario, how person in power and how person in leadership behaves differently from each other, and how can you tell differences. So when I came to US, I had done no house job, I had done no training in Pakistan, so I started my surgical training in US. So I remember I was a first-year surgical resident. I had never placed a central venous catheter, and we got called in to put a central venous line in somebody. I had never done it. So I'll give you two examples. One of my senior residents, I called him for help, and he gave me a lot of nonsense. Basically saying that you're useless. You went through all medical school. You never learned how to central line. What good are you? So what that person was doing was basically using his position of power to not help me, but just to enforce his authority. On the other hand, I called somebody else who was another surgical resident who was senior to me, and he said to me that the first thing he said was, "I will be there." And I still remember that him saying to me that when I needed some help because some patient was not doing so well, one of my seniors saying to me on the phone, "I will be there," was just so calming and comfortable for me. And, in that respect in my heart, what I had for him still was just so unbelievable, because his words were very powerful. He said, "We're all in it together." And when you become leaders and when you go to higher positions, it does not take much to say these things that, "I'll be there," or "We're all in it together," because that tells your junior people that they can trust you. So that person in my life was Jonathan Klein. And what I learned from him was that whenever somebody calls you for help, they are not calling you because they want to, it's because they need you. No human being will ever call anybody for ask for anything. And whenever somebody asks you for something, what makes us better human beings is to go out of our way to help them. So I think that's one very important lesson which I learned from him, and I still try to live by that principle. Whenever somebody calls you for help, never say no. I'll give you another example. When I was a little senior resident, we were rounding at 5 in the morning, and our junior most resident was called by, another surgical chief resident, another service, and this, they start yelling at each other and shouting and this and that. So our own chief resident, which was an example of power, he could have helped them. I remember, but he looked away and, he smiled and said, thank God I'm not an intern. While our fourth year resident, he was behind, he was a little bit junior to the chief resident, but he took the phone away from intern and gave him a very, very powerful message to the other team and said, if you don't respect my teammates, we will all fight together. And I felt like, somebody who can fight for your respect or disrespect is a leadership quality that nobody, it just tells you you're a good human being, other people will follow you. And very frankly, he's still one of my mentors from 20 years ago. And the lesson which I learned from Jeremy was that, working together is about teams. Nobody will work for us, any of us, unless and until we have this ability to form teams. So moving forward in my life, and I was doing research years, one of our postdoc fellows was always late, had trouble complaining, had trouble completing the experiments, poor presentation. We all thought this person is not good. He does not know what's going on. We had two principal investigators, and one of them basically threatened to fire him that you're not good, and stopped giving him more experiments. Well, one of my other principal investigators, he took his time to sit down with him, for a few hours and just said, what is going on? Talk to me. He wrote down multiple notes, and, there were, other problems. This person was a foreigner. And I think the problem was English was not his first language, and the person was struggling. Every time he heard something in English, his mind was going in translation mode, and then he had to come out of the translation mode. So the problem was simple. The problem was not his IQ. Problem was not his work habits. Problem was not the fact that he couldn't do experiment. The problem was simply, he couldn't understand English. And, that was Dr. Dardik, was one of my lifetime mentors. And he always used to tell us that, successful people are successful because they know what they're doing. They know what they're good at. And leaders know what others are good at. It goes beyond than ourselves and our lives. It goes beyond us. And the other thing which I've also learned from him was that whenever somebody is struggling, we should take our time and effort to listen to them. All of us have stories. All of us have a story in our life. There are reasons why we're doing certain things. There are reasons why all of us cannot do other things. But it takes a bigger human being to give time to somebody. I feel like as physicians, as doctors and surgeons, one thing we do not give others is time. If we care about people, we give them time. And before giving up on any other human beings, we should listen to their story. And you'll be surprised how many times we find things which make us better human beings. Another of my favorite stories that Dr. Yan was one of our general surgery attendings. I was a general surgery resident. I was doing a gall lap chole with him. I was doing the case. He was standing behind, and I put the clip on the cystic artery, and we cut the cystic artery, and it starts to bleed, and a very clean case gets converted into a very hemorrhagic case. It took us time to grab the cystic artery, which had sunk in the fossa, and then I just messed it up pretty big time when I was a resident. So, Dr. Yalom scrubbed in the case, and he just said, Aziz, you should have squeezed, Aziz, the squeeze. And he just kept saying, but, I think one thing I learned from him was, even as I did a mistake and I put somebody's life at jeopardy, he never blamed me. He always said, we are doing this, we did a bad job, and the clip came off. How can we do it better? And I think, as Faisal was saying about the concept of psychological safety, these are the things which give us psychological safety, is to make sure there's no blaming. And even if there's blaming, I'll talk in a second, it can be done in a private manner. And Dr. Savino was my surgical chair. If I'm a surgeon, I owe a lot to him, because he took a chance on a foreign graduate that nobody else was giving to take that on me. But he was a very strict surgeon, yet he was he was very well disciplined, and yet he took a very personal interest in my own career to help me. And he was a big believer in keeping it inside the family. And he always said something which never made sense at that time, but now I understand. So in US, general surgery residency is 5 years, and when you become the 5th year, or PGY 5, people call you chief resident. And Dr. Savina will always say that, many residents become PGY 5s, not all of them become chief residents. And he would always say that, junior residents will take orders from senior residents, but, a true chief resident leads by example. And he always said to me, Faisal, that, there will be a day in PGY 5, and when you realize, it's not really about you. When you're leading others, it's about people, it's about other people, it's about people who are you leading. And the day you realize it's not about you, that's the day when you transform into a chief resident or a leader. And that's something which I think clicks in all of us. There will come a day in all of your lives when you will realize, what, life is too complicated, and it's not all about me. It's about other people. And I think that's what makes us good leaders. Dr. Kamruda was my program director for vascular surgery fellowship. And, whenever we complained to him, that, the C-arm is not working, and, instruments are not working, and so is lazy, and this and that. And he would stand up and said, have you seen a human being who wants to be led by a person who's complaining all the times? The answer is no. So I think as leaders, we have to learn something. The one thing difference about leaders and powerful people is that I've never seen anybody at a leader who's complaining all the times, because it's such a thing that if we complain, people don't look at us as leaders. So I think that's one of the things we all have to learn as we grow up, is to be able to take all the pain from all surrounding us, and yet be able not to complain. And I think as Muslims, we strongly believe in it, that, the concept of sabr is just so important. Sometimes we just have to eat things up inside and not complain. It's very difficult, but that's what true leaders do. Last but not the least, Dr. Atnaf was the person who hired me as a vascular surgeon in our group at Penn State. And he would always say that, one of my favorite things about him, which is practical, he said about surgery, but also very practical in life, that you can't avoid the inevitable, but you can waste a lot of time trying to do so. And that is such a practical thing in life. For all of us, we are encountered with lots of problems, and sometimes I feel like we waste a lot of time in trying to avoid the inevitable, which is going to happen one day or the other. So what is common? I can go on and on, but what is common between all these examples is that all these people, when I look back in my life, they had a sense of importance for other human beings, a sense of a bigger purpose, a sense of a purpose which is higher than all of us. I think that's what made them leaders. I also feel that good leaders are respectful and kind people. As I said, as I give you the example from my 4th grade, kindness is just so important. No matter how high we go in life, we have to learn how to be kind to people. Good leaders are always kind to other people. Another thing, as I mentioned Dr. Yannan's example, we have to learn to take responsibility and admit mistakes. Leaders delegate tasks. Leaders do not delegate responsibility. And there's an example I'll tell in a second, that whenever you look at good human beings or good leaders, when there's a time to give credit, they look outside the window to give credit to other people. And when it's time to give blame, they look in the mirror and they give blame themselves. And powerful people who are not leaders do exactly opposite. They blame others and take all the credit. So, and also remember, no matter what stage in your life you are, you're in high school, you're in college, you're medical school, you're young doctors, always invest in other people. You always have somebody beneath you. You always have somebody who's in the same track, which is following you. I believe that investing in other people makes us better human beings. And God, frankly, Allah gives us more when we try to spread the goodness of our heart to others. Investing in people is just so important. And as I said before, positive attitude. Positive attitude is optimism, makes, gives you success. And I'm a firm believer in that. And my friends, Umar, he knows that how much I complain to him as a friend. But when you go in when you go at workplace, when you're showing up for work, be optimistic. Be super optimistic. You will never see a leader who is complaining all the times. As I said before, another important thing to learn is that when you're dealing with your others, when you have to give it back to them, always praise in public and criticize in private. People who cannot be leaders are the people who are criticizing in public, and they may praise in private. You did good job. In public, they're criticizing. This is just so important, because criticizing somebody in public or in a bigger forum just crushes their morale. You don't want to do that if you want to be a good leader. I said before about, blame and credit are important responsibilities. You have to be able to blame yourself all the times. And, all senior people in the audience can tell you, so many times in our lives, we just have to take the blame for us on behalf of our juniors, knowing very well, I didn't do anything wrong, but you just have to take the blame. And I think this is very, very important to learn in our life. If we look at our elders, if we look at, our grandparents or our parents or grandparents, so many times you see that, it was not their fault or anything, but you just have to keep quiet and take it from others. And that's what makes us leaders. And I also believe that leaders have purposes. All of us who are in leading positions, we know that we have to show up for work, do a good job, make sure you're seeing the patients, you're writing the notes, this and that. But these are the daily tasks. We all have a bigger purpose in our life. As Farooq Afzal just mentioned, that when teachers are trying to say something, do this or not do this, it's much more than that for the daily routine. It's about a bigger purpose. Somebody who's senior to you and asks you to do certain things in a certain way, he or she has a powerful purpose that we may not be able to understand at this time, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when you look back, you realize that that person actually had a much bigger purpose for me. Also, it's a great book, called Good to Great, which is a summary of all the great leaders in business world in the current times. And they interviewed their direct reports, people who were junior to them, and asked them their first impressions anonymously. And these are buzzwords which came up about good leaders, that good leaders were quiet. They were not loud people. They were always humble and modest and gracious and understated. And this, if you look at the statement, that all these leaders were seemingly ordinary people. You talk to them, you don't realize that this person had so many big titles and this and that, but they were quietly producing extraordinary results. And for anybody in leadership position, we should get used to criticism. We can't, we can't have hearing aids which selectively, filter out criticism and amplify compliments. We have to hear criticism and both. I'll end by saying that there are 5 levels of leadership, which are well described in textbooks. But I believe once you reach the level 4, which is investing in others, realizing that others' lives and other careers are more important than our own, that's what makes us leader. So this is a summary of which I briefly mentioned. Thank you so much for giving me time and listening to me. I look forward to hearing this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. So the wonderful presentation, and I really learned a lot from that. Just really a question from your presentation. Is it an impression that power is bad to have? Are we giving this impression that power is bad to have?
No, thank you. No, you need power to make changes. You cannot make changes, drastic changes, unless you have power. And they're not mutually exclusive. But I think for students, a young audience, the way I believe in it is, even leadership does not need to have a title. I believe that we all are leaders. I mean, most people in this audience, I imagine in your audience, are either students or physicians or going to become physicians. I also believe that, physicians are natural born leaders. People actually listen to us. I mean, look at our patients. We tell them, stop smoking. Somebody's been smoking for 30 years. They'll try to at least quit for us. So why do they do that? Because I think we're all physicians. People listen to us. So we're all natural born leaders. We just have, as I said, leadership is about influence. We all have some influence on others. The key thing is that even when we get titles, that's the thing which I've Umar makes fun of me that I talk about titles and not having titles, yet I'm the person with many titles and with me. It's this feel that whenever you get a title, I feel that it's a blessing from Allah and additional responsibility to never forget that the purpose of power is not to punish others or to destroy others, is to build others. So they're not mutually exclusive. I think we should just make sure that we're investing in others. Thank you.